Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with hosts Jimmy Hinton
and Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible.
We always thank you for the financial assistance, of course, in helping maintain this podcast, as well as all of the support you give us by means of encouragement, your kind words, and by listening. Thank you.
And bunches of our patrons received their free signed copy of my new book, The Devil Inside. So I've been hearing some really good feedback, and we were happy to send that out to you. In fact, you have your copy sitting here.
I just got my copy. Look at this. I'm so excited. I am so very excited. This book is amazing. If you do not have a copy yet, go on Amazon and order yourself a copy. It is truly one of the best, if not the best, I have read. I'm a little bit biased, but honestly, it is written so well and has so much help in it. So
it's also it's also very readable. That's the one thing I made it intentionally very readable because one of my problems, I guess, I kind of burned out on abuse books because so many of them are just either really heavy, or they're just slow reading, or
they get sidetracked with technicalities and words that are difficult to understand. I love that you use everyday language in this.
Yeah, I wanted to make it
wonderful.
I wanted to make it a quick read, so it takes probably 2.5 hours, depending on how quick of a reader you are. But it, pretty quick read, and it's not a super heavy read either.
No, it's not, but guaranteed you will want to go back. I just told Jimmy I already read the book once, and then I read portions from it again. Now I want to reread the entire book again. It's that type of book that you'll want to keep going back to. So please do get a copy. It's an amazing book.
Yeah, I hope it's really helpful. And
it is.
Excuse me. I've been hearing a lot of really positive feedback, so that's been super encouraging. Well, we wanted to talk in this episode about, there are some themes that I laid out in the book, at least introducing different themes and different topics. It's certainly not an in-depth book, and it's not meant to be. It kind of paves the way for future books where I can get more in-depth on certain topics. But, I think it's worth talking about deception. That was something that was really difficult for me to write because I felt... I felt like I was being fair and honest about my training at both the undergraduate and seminary levels. I absolutely love my alma maters, and I in the book I said I recommend my schools to people, but they didn't teach us anything about deception or abuse, like nothing.
And I think, Jimmy, a lot of the reason is that deception in the light of especially abuse has just come to light. And, for your alma maters, of which you do love and highly recommend, in support of them, I guess, or in defense of them, abuse wasn't on the forefront like it is now. And
no, but it was still something that they dealt with, and I know, I know from talking to people who worked there, it's not like us where we had not experienced anything with it at all. There were instances of abuse. And for me, it's inexcusable. There comes a time where you have to learn. You have to say, okay, we we were aware of this and we may not have known what to do with it, but now there are resources out there and we've got to be talking about that.
Right.
And I think it's just the church is so afraid, and the Christian circles are still so afraid to talk about deception. And it's killing us. It is killing the church.
For our listeners. I know what you're talking about. I've read what you wrote about in the book. You and I have discussed deception hours upon hours. What define it for our listeners?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think before I do that, one of the things that we tend to do is we categorize everything as sin. We just kind of throw this blanket term out there, and we've talked about that before. This sin leveling, equalization of sin, saying, "Oh, a sin is a sin is a sin. We're all sinners. We all have skeletons in our closet." That just is a terrible, terrible way to think about sin, and particularly sins that are crimes. I mean, we're talking about criminal offenses. And people cover up for it because they want to lump everything together and say, well, we're all humans on this earth together. We all struggle one and the same. That's not true. So deception, which the Bible has tons to say about it. Deception is when you have people who masquerade as somebody who's a person who's righteous for the purpose of getting and taking what they want, for oppressing somebody else, for humiliating somebody else, for abusing somebody else, for hunting somebody else.
And I think your key phrase there is for the purpose of. I feel like sometimes I've deceived people a bit because they don't know me completely, but that's not intentional. We're talking about intentional.
Yeah, this is fully intentional.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's why these categories they're really important. And before I get too far into that, I'm not a fan of categories because there are never. I'm just not a black and white thinker, so I'm an analytical thinker. So for me, I just talked about this on Sunday. My color scale begins with gray. It begins with a gray scale because I don't do black and white well. Right. So from there, it just kind of mushrooms and turns into full color because I see things three-dimensional. I don't see things in legalistic manners. Like I'm a very out-of-the-box thinker. I don't put things into these nice, neat, clean categories. So I think on the one hand, we have to have categories for sin and deception, crimes, things like that. But I want to be cautious with that because there are not neat categories where there's no overlap. And it's as if we can put these things in these nice, clean categories and then it just fits there because that's not how deception works. Deception is very fluid. I talk about magicians a lot and the analog of magicians. And I talk about that in the book too. Because that's really Doctors Macknick and Martinez Conde, their book was so pivotal for me. That was a tipping point in my understanding about how abuse and deception works. Because it was from a neuroscience perspective, and their book, Sleight of Mind, what the neuroscience of magic teaches us about our everyday deceptions. That book was phenomenal. I remember
the light bulb going off for you when you began reading their
Everything
book.
made sense.
Yeah.
It was like a light switch.
It was.
Everything made sense.
And then it clicked together, this whole deception thing.
Because with abusers, everything is about deception. We hear it's all about power. It's all about control. It's all about power. Well, yeah, it is, but it's more about deception than it is about power and control. Power and control is just kind of a byproduct of deception. Deception is really where the bread and butter, so to speak, is for abusers because it's a mindset. Power and control, that's also a mindset, but it's not like they just come in and flank their way into people's lives and just take control because they're so powerful.
I think with the deception, you're right. It's a charge, an internal charge.
It's exciting
for an abuser to come off as this wonderful person when their thoughts followed by their actions are among the most devious ever.
Yeah.
And they get away with it.
Yeah.
And so that's where the charge is. That's where the excitement is for them. That gives them power.
Right.
But you are correct. The overriding external thought is, I can get away with it.
Yeah.
I know I can get away with it.
And abusers know that. So, there are a couple things going on simultaneously. One is, I jotted this term down, but we are deception illiterate in the church. We know nothing about deception.
Right.
We are deception illiterate. Mm-hmm. So we don't know the first thing about deception, generally speaking. We're not deception experts. We're deception illiterate. And abusers know that. So, they can increase this deception and run marathons around us. Mm-hmm. They can get in, take whatever they want, and walk away while people are praising them and cheering them on and saying what a great Christian person they are. So, and we saw that, we talked about Ravi Zacharias last week, and you were just saying, I didn't look at the comments that people made, a couple on YouTube, but beyond that, I have no time or interest. But you said a bunch of people were really attacking us for that episode, saying that, we weren't given the full picture, and Ravi was such a good man, and he was this Christian apologist, and, this is what abusers love. They love being able to go in, masquerade, deceive, steal, rob, take, oppress, and walk away from that getting everything that they came for, and having people cheering them on, saying what great people they are.
Hero.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
Like a hero. Yeah. Yes.
So that's all part of the deception techniques, and that's why the Bible is so clear. When it comes to deception, it's unlike any other sin. Mm-hmm. When it comes to deception and oppression, or those two combined together, here's how the Bible treats that. Have nothing to do with them. Get rid of them. Do away with them. Send them out. Cast them away. Get rid of them because they're dangerous. They're absolutely dangerous, predatory people. And they're so sneaky and they're so good at what they do that you're not, unless you're really super trained in deception, you're not going to be able to spot it. No matter how good your heart is, you're not going to be able to spot them.
Being a mom of so many kids and having all your friends and whatnot in the house, I became aware of certain actions of children also. And deception begins early.
Yeah.
You have the child who will walk up to another child and pound them on the head right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And that other kid will start screaming, Mommy, he hit me. And you saw it and you know. And the other kid will stand there and it's like, yeah, I did it.
Or they'll say, I didn't do it.
Or say, I didn't do it,
I
but
threw
did
their
it
teeth.
right in front of you. Then you have the other child who, while you're busy doing something, will go up to a child, do the sneak attack, pound him a shot, and then be sitting like this, smiling at you.
Yeah.
And that child will say, he just smashed me in the rib. And no, I didn't. I'm sitting here like a little
And they'll
angel.
convince you that the other kid is a liar.
Yes.
And they're so convincing.
And yes.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So it starts at a very young age. Mm-hmm. And if we don't pay attention, we really are bamboozled, so to speak. We are.
Yeah.
And I know that I was many times. Mm-hmm. I would, get the other child, the wrong child, put that child on a timeout, give that child a whack on the butt. Or, pardon me, I did whack on the butt. Not often, did I?
Actually, I don't. This is actually a true story. I don't remember being spanked by you.
I didn't do.
I do remember from my dad.
Yeah. He would grab the
But
belt.
I don't remember.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't remember.
hated
But
that,
anyway,
But
I mean,
anyway,
it's point well taken.
Would get a
Right.
timeout or get yelled at or disciplined, whatever. And so it begins at a very early age. And abusers are experts. Mm-hmm. They are classic experts at it.
But those kids learn early on. They learn how they can get away with it. And by the way, I think that's a normal thing for kids to do. I think it's normal.
It is.
I mean, my 5-year-old does it. He just did it.
To put that in the same category.
No, but you're right. It starts young.
But it begins young. But abusers just become masters of that technique.
But they become masters, I think. This is opinion. They become masters because they learn at a young age that they can get away with it. And so, even my 5-year-old, who is very unlike his siblings, and he's so convincing. He can, we can...
I smile because
we can start to question...
He's adorable. He is.
I'm an expert in deception, and there are times when a little 5-year-old kid can make me question, like, all right, who's being truthful here? The kid who's crying, or my 5-year-old who's like, I swear I didn't do it. I'm telling the truth.
I'm innocent,
And he's lying through his teeth.
And I'm laughing, but we have to be on our toes.
Yeah, and you have to learn to shut it down. You have to learn to distinguish fact from truth, or fact from fiction, rather. And you have to separate your emotions, because in a moment like that, emotions are exactly what even a little 5-year-old kid is trying to pull on your heartstrings, and they just, it's like this intuitive thing.
Yes.
So I'm going to show you an example, and this was a story. This is from 2 years ago, and we've probably read this in another episode, but Mom, you're familiar with this story. This is the one, the Christian Chronicle.
Yes. Okay.
My friend Bobby Ross came. He came up here, flew up here from Oklahoma, and did a story on a church that I was really involved with, not far from here, Uniontown, Pennsylvania, just an hour down the road. And this church was like classic cover-up of a very vile and dangerous abuser, pedophile abuser. We're talking several of these kids committed suicide. He would threaten them. He would threaten violence on them and their parents and pets if they ever told. This guy's just a despicable human. There's nothing good about him at all. And so the church surrounded him. They rallied around him, and I had one conversation with one of the elders, and it ended up going in a very bad direction. Anyway, he ended up getting arrested. There was a judge who came back and reversed the charges that were brought against him because of Pennsylvania's statute of limitations. So he got to walk out of prison. He's not on the sex offender registry. The guy literally gets a clean slate.
Terrible.
And this guy, I'm telling you, there's stuff that I can't tell because it's confidential, but I'm telling you, this guy is one of the worst, most vile abusers. So in the article, Bobby Ross interviewed the elders, and I want to read just these 2 short paragraphs. The title is Elder Defends Treatment of Victims. Bob Coldren, one of the church's 3 elders, stressed in an interview that brothers twice came forward at church and repented of his sins. See what I mean? Like, it's this...
Yep.
There's no substance to it. There's no evidence of this. And I know from talking to parents of victims at this church what this quote-unquote repentance was. And it was a total dog and pony show. This guy has these elders wrapped around his little finger, and he knows it.
Right.
And then this is a quote from this elder. Just like anybody else who comes forward at church. Okay, let me pause there for a minute. Let me repeat that again. Just like anybody else who comes forward at church. What's the mistake in that statement?
This is not an action of just like anybody else.
It's not like anybody else.
Exactly.
The levels of deception, of threatening, of control, of manipulation, of lying, of masquerading is not like anybody else, and it shouldn't be treated like anybody else.
Right.
Just like anybody else who comes forward at church, is it my place to judge him on his sins? Is that a rhetorical question? Yes, it's your place.
Yes. Absolutely.
Or is it God's to judge him of those? Said Coldren, who is also brother-in-law.
Wow.
Remember that episode? This was a while ago, but I think it was like an episode in the 30s. I was just looking back, like 30-something, episode 30-something. I did an episode, and I talk about it in the book too. I talk about it a lot in my book. Foundations are critical. Getting God's foundation is right. God's foundation is righteousness and justice. God's foundation is righteousness and justice. Psalm 89:14. Well, why is that important? It's important because that term in Hebrew for righteousness means it was a term that was used in the marketplace for balanced scales. That word for righteousness means a balanced scale that's not tipped in either direction. It doesn't favor either direction for anybody. You begin with balanced scales.
I want to encourage our listeners to go back to that podcast. You and I did a series. It was not just one, but we did 3 or 4 on this whole idea of righteousness and the foundation. But go ahead here.
Yeah. So, I mean, here you can see very clearly, at least I can see very clearly, the tipping of the scale.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Who am I to judge? We're all sinners, just like anybody else. Now that sounds balanced, but it's not, because when you parse this, it's not balanced at all. Just like anybody else who comes forward to church, is it my place to judge on his sins, or is it God's to judge him of those? First of all, you're erasing yourself out of the equation, and you're taking no accountability whatsoever. Also, Paul says, direct quote from Paul, are we not to judge those from within the church? Yes.
That's powerful.
We are.
Yes.
Absolutely,
yes.
we are.
It's powerful. Yes.
Now, that's not judgment, condemning them to hell or, sending them to heaven. That's, but that's not what Paul's talking about. Paul's talking about making a judgment. We make judgments all the time.
Based on the truth of the foundation.
When you interview people to work for you, you are making judgments.
I am making a judgment call. Yes, I am.
So, anyway, said Cauldron, who is brother's brother-in-law. So now you have one of 3 elders who happens to be a family member, which in itself, I guess we're a case in point. Sometimes that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But we had to not tip the scale. We had to, you and I had separate ourselves emotionally from the man who we thought we knew in order not to tip the scales in his favor.
Absolutely.
We had to pretend like we didn't know the man and report him as if he was a total stranger.
Yeah.
But here you have a brother-in-law who, and I know from talking to parents of the victims, this guy really rallied behind his abuser brother-in-law and was like really campaigning for his innocence. It's really disgusting, and that's tipping the scale in the wrong direction. You're placing your thumb on the scale and you're tipping it in favor of an abuser.
That's such a good illustration, Jimmy, that I hope people will take time to really think on what you've just said about the tipping of the scale, because often we do it without realizing that we're doing it. We think that we're showing support for someone when in fact we haven't looked at the truth, we haven't looked at the facts, we've made a prejudgment, and we have decided, that's a good guy, I've
known him my whole life. Who cares? That has nothing to do with deception. And that's what I mean. We're deception illiterate, and his illiteracy is shown through here. Then this last quote, if I judge him if he's sincere or not, I'm judging wrong because I can't see what's in his heart. Wrong. You can see what's in somebody's heart, at least to a certain degree. And it's just this whole notion that, well, he said he was sorry. It's not my place to look any further.
Your illustration that you created on the fruits that we shared with her is perfect for this. I mean, is absolutely perfect. We can see inside a person's heart to a very large degree based on the fruit that they're bearing. Right. I mean, come on. Yeah. Come on.
Well, Jesus says this too. And, again, I talk about this in the book, so I don't want to give away the whole thing, but.
No, you're not.
But, in Matthew 7, Jesus says twice, you will recognize them by their fruit. Then he says, can a thorn tree bear fruit? No.
No.
It's a thorn tree.
Absolutely.
And then, likewise, can a fig tree bear thistles. No, because it's a fig tree. And he says, you will recognize them by their fruit. And he uses a term that I think is really fascinating. It's really important. He uses a term, ravenous wolves. He's telling people, be on guard. Right. Look out for these ravenous wolves who come from within. They're not outsiders. They're not. Right. And they're not non-Christians, worldly
thing
people.
That I think we, as Christians, especially, don't pay attention to. We're thinking it's always going to be an outsider. No, it's not. No, it's not. The deceit, all of this vile that we're talking about, vileness, is coming from within.
Absolutely.
Within
100%.
Group, within the group to destroy.
Yeah.
And that's what we're being warned about.
But you have to know what to look for, and you have to know what to do with it once you recognize it. And you can't do that when you're tipping the scale in favor of somebody. And here are some statements that tip the scale. Whether you know it or not, these are terms that are tipping the scale. Boy, I can't ever see him doing something like that. You're tipping the scale. Right. You're making assumptions without looking at the facts that are in front of you. It couldn't be him. I've known him my whole life. He is one of the biggest spiritual mentors in my life. You're tipping the scale.
I just shared with Jimmy this morning. I had a visitor at my workplace, before coming here with Jimmy, and this man asked about John, Jimmy's dad. He said, what's he up to? He's such a wonderful man. I've lost track of him over the years. I said, oh, he's in prison. And his response was like, no.
I'm surprised he didn't say, how was he falsely blamed?
And he said, why? And I told him, and honestly, I thought he was going to fall over, really. He said, not him. It can't be. He was such a wonderful man. And then he said, he was at every basketball game at school. He was at all the functions, lending support. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
And
Again, it begs the question, so what? That has nothing to do. Right. That has nothing to do with deception. And I think, when we're deception illiterate, you get statements like that where people, they can't even begin to fathom somebody doing something so vile.
He said, I can't
because they know nothing about deception and how it works.
I can't imagine that he is in prison for that.
Yeah.
He said, I can't. And that's how we are a lot of the time.
So, I look at how Jesus trained his disciples, and that was another thing that I talked about. Like, I used this analogy of driving truck. When I drove truck, I literally had 3 weeks of training.
Yeah. And
then 1 week where I drove a truck like 50% of the time or 40% of the time or whatever with a trainer. That was for 5 days, 6 days. He gave the check. He gave approval. They literally handed me keys to an 80,000-pound tractor trailer and said, here you go. You're on your own.
Yeah.
That was my training. 4 weeks from start to finish, from the application process till I was behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound tractor trailer on my 100% on my own, living in my truck.
Cross-country driving
the lower 48 states and Canada. Yeah. That was my training. 4 weeks. 4 weeks.
Scary.
And it is, but it isn't, because they trained me well. Yeah. They threw me into the ring, and one of the most effective parts of the training, in my opinion, was all the gruesome pictures that they showed of these really bad accidents. And they showed us, they had these poster boards printed out. It was physical pictures of these really horrific accidents. And they showed us these accidents, and they said, this is what happens when you lose focus. Even for a second. You pick up a map and put it in your lap. This is what happens. And they showed for each of these accidents, they knew what caused that accident. And so they told us, in this accident, this scenario, one was it was really awful, but it's called a high hook. So when you back your tractor into a trailer, you're supposed to back your apron partially underneath or your fifth wheel partially underneath the apron of the trailer, and then you set the brake and you get out and you physically inspect it to make sure that your fifth wheel is not lower than the apron of the trailer, because what happens is, if it is, you hook underneath it, boom, you feel and hear the click where this latch comes behind, and it hooks around your kingpin. There's a pin that hangs down on the trailer, and that's what couples the two together. Okay. A high hook is when you don't get out to look and your trailer's sitting too high. So you back underneath it, you think that you're latched in, and then you start going down the road, and as soon as you hit a big bump, your trailer literally jumps out of your fifth wheel on your tractor, and it detaches itself. And so they showed this accident where there was a high hook, and the trailer rolled on top of a car where a family of 5, they were all killed. They showed us these images and said, this is what happens when one time you don't get out and look like you're trained to do. That was our training. Yeah. That stuff sticks with you.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Now contrast that with the training for ministry, where it's all lecture. I mean, 98% of my 9 years that I spent in school was lecture, sitting at the feet of a professor, and not in actual ministry. They didn't talk about high hook scenarios. They didn't talk about, hey, if somebody comes to you and alleges abuse and you handle it poorly, this is the outcome. RZIM, RZIM Ministries. This is the outcome when you don't believe victims. Not a single whisper on that stuff. So, we've got to do a better job at training people well, and teaching them about deception. And how do you sort this stuff out? And how do you know when somebody's being deceptive? How do you know when somebody's pulling on your heartstrings to manipulate you?
There's deception at so many different levels. And, of course, for the high level, those in ministry who are leaders, then there are, for the actual congregants, and then within the home. And it's important for all of us to understand deception. So
Absolutely.
You're right. We are all, to a degree, very deception illiterate.
Yeah. And it's hurting so many people.
Totally deception.
It's hurting so many people and destroying churches.
So where do we begin, Jimmy? How does...
You start by having conversations about it, and you start getting trained. You find deception specialists, and you start getting trained, and you start saying, okay, how do we learn about deception? Like, how do we learn to recognize it when it's right in front of us? Because if we're not doing that, we're going to remain deception illiterate, and these guys are going to keep running marathons around us. They're going to keep stealing away the innocence of children.
Sadly, as in our case, there was these vile actions done right under my nose.
Right.
Had I been at least even minimally trained to look for something, possibly some of that could have been prevented.
Yeah, I don't think possibly. I think most definitely. And that's where I take a little different approach, and for time's sake we're going to run out here, but maybe we'll talk about that in the next episode or two. But my stance is abusers are not as undetectable as we think they are. It's just that nobody has really delved deeply into these deception techniques. And so we have these flatline basic grooming behaviors that, we train people. Look for the guy handing out lollipops and cash, and, who's
creepy looking, behind the bushes and all that.
Well, not necessarily like just hanging out with kids. They have no normal adult relationships. All these typical grooming behaviors that really are not good at equipping people for detecting deception at all. As long as we keep training people the way that we're currently training people, we're never going to spot abusers. So I think it's actually incredibly easy to spot, at a bare minimum, to spot deceptive people when you know deception techniques.
That you need to get together a training for this. For all levels. I mean, within the home. When we get married, we don't want to look at our spouse and question. I know I never did. I trusted your dad completely with everything. This is the person I gave my life to. He gave his life to me. I took it at face value. Little did I know there was such deception that started when he was a young teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And I married into this deception. And I feel like our whole marriage was a game of deception.
Mm-hmm.
And it was.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is it's really instruction by trial. And that's how Jesus trained his disciples. You know, when he sent them out 2 by 2.
Right.
I mean, this was his crash course into ministry. He sends them out 2 by 2, and he tells them, I'm sending you out as lambs in the midst of wolves.
Mm-hmm.
What's he saying to them?
Well,
you're going to get shredded. And then he tells them what he means by that.
Yeah.
He's like, be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And then he says, you're going to experience floggings and, you know, all these different things in the synagogues. He's telling them, you are going to experience this.
Not you might.
As I send you out.
Not you might, but you
See ya.
are. Right.
And he sends them out. That was their training. So it's this trial by fire, which may seem inhumane, but I'm telling you, it is a good
It works.
teaching tool that teaches people, like, you know, it teaches them how to be street smart. So we've got to start teaching people how to be street smart, and we've got to teach people about deception. And that's not all book knowledge. That's not all stuff that you can teach by picking up books and reading about deception.
Right.
You have to experience deception up close and personal, and really see how this ebb and flow works when abusers are manipulating people and toying with people. So anyway, we'll kind of leave you there.
It's not continued.
It's certainly not.
This is too good.
Yeah, this
leave it right here because we're at a spot where we need to pick up and go beyond that. What do we do? The what do we do part.
Yeah, and there's tons that we can do.
Here.
So that I don't want to leave you thinking, oh man, there's no way that we can. There's no way that we can do this, because you can. Anybody can learn about deception. Okay. Anybody can learn about it. So truth bomb for today. I think, like Jesus, we need to just toss people, including ourselves, into the ring. Just start observing people. I'm not talking about, you know, sending your kids into the arms of somebody who you think is an abuser. I'm not talking about doing weird stuff like that. I'm talking about observing people. Just start observing mannerisms. Listen to people's words. Do you get a sense that somebody's being manipulative? If so, start looking at different deception techniques. But
I think when we stand back, Jimmy, take a step back, and you said it, remove our emotions and really look at things.
You'll see things so much more clearly.
We do.
Yeah. So, shielding people from deception. It's keeping us so uneducated about deception. We've got to stop shielding and just start observing.
Yeah.
We've got to learn about deception. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to this episode, as always, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.